Hagut Moed. Here are some of the thoughts that we shared in the courtyard outside the Beit Knesset today on the first day of Sukkot and Shabbat. There is a very puzzling midrash on the pasuk Ulekachtem lachem bayom harishon pri etz hadar v'chulei, that you shall take on the first day the fruit of the pleasant tree. In other words, the arba minim lulav esrog. The midrash says it's not the first day; it's the 15th day of the month. Why does the Torah call it the first day? To teach us it's the first day for what's called cheshbon avonot, the first day for the calculation of the sins, or for the account of the sins, which means, it seems to be, that between Yom Kippur and Sukkot, if we sinned, it doesn't count. That's a pretty shocking thing. That's a carte blanche to do whatever we want for 4 days between Yom Kippur and Sukkot. Strange. It's hard to imagine that that's what the rabbis had in mind. I'd like to suggest 4 different levels of understanding of this midrash. The first level of understanding is a practical one, that as soon as Yom Kippur is over, the Jew is going to be very busy. He won't have time to commit sins because he's got to build a sukkah. And unlike today, where you buy a sukkah, you can put the thing up in 42 and a half minutes. Once upon a time, people really had to build a sukkah. It was a big deal. I once did it. I once had to do it out of scratch, to find the wood, to find the branches for the schach and everything like that. The whole thing took a couple of days. It wasn't such an easy task. I had to go shopping. I had to go, to the lumber yard. It was really a bit of a project. It was great, but it was a project. So once upon a time, that's the way it was. We'd be busy for the entire time getting the sukkah, getting the arba minim, and a person doesn't have a chance to sin. And then Sukkot comes, and now everything is done, and then we can relax. And that's what the Yetzer Hara loves. He loves it when we have nothing to do, because then he gets us to start thinking, to start talking, to start doing stuff, to start taking stuff, so forth and so on. The Yetzer Hara loves when we have nothing to do. Sadly, during the lockdowns for the corona, we've seen tremendous growth in substance abuse, in violence in the family, and other bad things happening, because the Yetzer Hara likes, unfortunately, when we have nothing to do. And a person, when they've finished all their preparations, now they have nothing to do. So therefore, Sukkot, when it comes in, it's the beginning of the cheshbon avonot, the account of the sins, because now we have free time on our hands, and this is our test. I'd like to add, let's add another level to it. I have 3 more. And the next level is that, yes, indeed, there is a certain amount of forgiveness for the sins committed between Yom Kippur and Sukkot. Now you may ask why. I mean, after all, a person on Yom Kippur is saying Al Chet for the speaking Lashon Hara, for example, and then he goes and speaks Lashon Hara the next day. So doesn't that kind of make him out to be a phony? And the answer is no. It's, in a sense, almost psychologically natural that it might happen. Because a person until Yom Kippur was accustomed to speaking that way, and it's a little bit optimistic to think that in the basis of one day, all of a sudden he's going to change 180 degrees. So therefore, it doesn't surprise us that the person might sin. But here's why the sin is more forgivable: because the person who does sin in the immediate days after Yom Kippur does not regret the teshuvah that they did on Yom Kippur. The opposite. They probably feel worse that they committed that sin because they did teshuvah. It's like a person who declares they're going to go on a diet. And the first day is great, and the second day after the diet starts, they pass by the pizza parlor, and well, as you know, the rest is history. So does that mean that they've given up on the diet? Absolutely not. Okay, at the beginning you trip. When a little child starts to walk, they fall a lot. So at the beginning you tripped. But there's a limit to how long that beginning lasts. And when Sukkot begins, that's the end of the beginning. A chag, a holiday, is already a new period in time. In the laws of Avelut, for example, we shouldn't know, a Shiva ends when a Chag comes, even if it's before 7 days, because the Chag is a new period in time. So this is already the tax deadline. So in other words, yes, there's a certain amount of forgiveness because it's natural after Yom Kippur that a person might still have the echoes of their previous behavior, but now it's decision time. Now it's time for cheshbon avonot. It's time for the person to make a calculation. And what is the calculation? The Mishnah tells us. The sechar avera, the reward for the sin, versus the hefsed avera, the loss of the sin. What does one gain by committing a sin? Well, they gain whatever the Yetzer Hara promises them, a fleeting benefit in this world. And what do they lose? They lose everything they gained back on Yom Kippur. So therefore, Sukkot is really the first day when things count again, because now it's time to pay up. Now it's time to really show our commitment. Let's add on a third level, because the Kli Yakar asks a very interesting question. This medrash that talks about Sukkot, the first day of Sukkot being the first day of the accounting of the sins, is only referring to Lulav and Etrog, to the Arba Minim. That's where the word Rishon shows up on the pasuk of Arba Minim. Why not also on Sukkah? What is it about Arba Minim that engenders this day of reckoning, that now we are once again on the account of sins? So it occurred to me that there's a very fundamental difference between Sukkah and Lulav and Esrog, other than the fact that they're completely different mitzvot. But it's the time frame. Sukkah is all of the holiday of 7 days, is the mitzvah of Sukkah. Whereas Lulav and Esrog is really, from on a biblical level, only the very beginning. It's only on the first day. And this year we didn't even have that. We only have the rest of the days, which we do not for the mitzvah of Arba Minim, but Zecher L'Migdash, as a remembrance of what was in the temple times. In temple times, they used to take the Lulav and Esrog the whole week of Sukkot. So nowadays, as a Zecher, to remember that, we do it the whole week of Sukkot, but it's really only a biblical mitzvah on the first day. And it's really only a momentary mitzvah. As soon as you lift up the Esrog and the Lulav, you fulfill the mitzvah. So it really takes 3 seconds to do this mitzvah. And it's over. And there is a lesson to be had over there. And that lesson is that in order to really affect change, we can't be passive. Sukkah is a passive mitzvah. One doesn't really change their behavior at all. They just change their location. As a matter of fact, it's the only mitzvah where laziness can bring reward. If you're lazy and you're going to lie like a bump on a log and take a rest and take a big nap, and you do it in the Sukkah, you're getting a mitzvah even though you're being lazy. So it's actually one example where laziness is a rewardable behavior. But it's still passive, whereas Lulav symbolizes the human being. The Sefer HaChinuch gives this example that the etrog is like the heart, and the lulav is like the spine, and the hadassim are like the eyes, and the aravot are like the lips. In other words, we see here a human being. We're basically lifting up ourselves and shaking. If you want to make the changes of Yom Kippur stick, you can't do it passively. You can't do it like a sukkah. You can't do it with just moving a little bit over here. You have to lift yourself up and shake. In other words, you need to start new habits. You have to proactively seek new behaviors, make big changes, and then it will stick. So therefore, it's the cheshbon avonot. It's the test. Will you make those changes? Will I make those changes or not? Therefore, this is the day when this is tested. And I'll add to this one more level, and that is that the Sefer HaChinuch also says this, that the holiday of Sukkot is the festival of the harvest. It's a time of great joy and great wealth, especially in an agrarian society. People brought in their entire crop, and they were rich because they had so much to sell. They would earn enough money to last them the whole year until the next harvest. So it was a time of great wealth, Chag HaAsif. Now, there is a mitzvah in the Torah that is relevant in all areas, and that is bikurim, or bechorot, the firstborn, the first fruits. To take the first of these blessings that we get from God and to raise them up and to sanctify them is a critical mitzvah. Why is it such a critical mitzvah? Well, there's a pasuk in Kohelet, which we read today, that says, Ma yitron la'adam b'chol ha'malo she'ya'amol tachat hashemesh. What advantage is it to the man for all of the work that he will do under the sun? This is King Solomon expressing that, whenever a person works and works and works, and what does he gain from it? And the implication is that there is no gain from it. But the Medrash says, well, if the work is under the sun, then there's no gain. But if the work is above the sun, then there is a gain. What does it mean above the sun? Rashi tells us that the work is work in Torah and mitzvot. So the question is, for this I need a Medrash? Of course there's reward. Of course there's benefit for Torah and mitzvot. Why does the Medrash have to tell me that? It's obvious. And so the katav sofia explains that the benefit is not just for the Torah and the mitzvot. It's actually on the work, the work in the fields, the work in the office. If a person is doing those things for reasons beneath the sun, in other words, farzich, for myself, for my own benefit, then there's no advantage. But if I'm doing the things that I'm doing to earn money because I want to support a Jewish life, I want to be able to send my kids to yeshiva, I want to give tzedakah, I want to be able to earn enough money so that I can spend time studying Torah, I can hire other people to work for me. In other words, that they're working a parnasa for the sake of their Jewish life, of their spiritual life, well, that's a different animal entirely. In derech eretz kadmala Torah, person has to go the work the way of the world in order to achieve Torah. Mein kemach ein Torah. If there's no flour, there's no Torah. So if they do it for that reason, then b'chol amalo, then whatever his work may be, that's lamala min hashemesh, that's above the sun, and there is an advantage and benefit for that. And that is symbolized by the mitzvah of bikurim, the first fruits. We take the first blessing that we have and we raise it up and sanctify it. And Sukkot being the festival of the harvest, when we're going to get all this bracha, all this blessing, if we, at the very beginning, take the agricultural products, the four minim, the four species, and raise them up and sanctify them, then that is our declaration that everything we're going to earn, we're going to be using l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven, for the sake of a Jewish life. I like to say that and that's why it has to be dafka at the very beginning of Chag Sukkot Bayom HaRishon, and therefore it's the Rishon l'cheshbon avonot. If we don't start off with it, then we've done a sin. This is the test. I like to say that the three holidays of Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah, is the holiday of Adam and Chava, because they were born on Rosh Hashanah. Yom Kippur, I think, may be the holiday of Cain, because Cain was the one when he killed Hevel. He then repented. He said, Gadol avoni minso, my sin is greater than I can bear. And God forgave him and made for him a sign, an oath of his forgiveness. And that's appropriate to Yom Kippur. On the Slichot of Erev Yom Kippur, we say, Machar yiyeh ha'ot hazeh, tomorrow will be this sign. What sign? The sign of forgiveness, similar to the sign that Cain got. So I think that's Yom Kippur. But Sukkot is Hevel. Why Hevel? Because Hevel was the first to bring bikurim. He brought from the firstborn of his flocks. And Hevel therefore made a calculation. What was his calculation? Sechar avera, the reward of a sin. In other words, the wealth which I use just for myself, for under the sun as it were, that's worthless. As it says in Kohelet, Havel Havalim, there's his name. Vanity of vanities. Hevel understood the vanity of wealth in Olam Hazeh. He understood that the only meaning of everything in Olam Hazeh is if we raise it up and sanctify it. So he gave the first of his flocks. And therefore that's bikurim, and that's the mitzvah of lulav and etrog, to symbolize a sort of bikurim on everything we're about to get. And therefore that's what the calculation of the sin must be. What is the reward of a sin? If it's for me, it's nothing. There's no advantage. There's nothing. And the loss, if I do the sin, the loss is I lose my connection to God that I achieved on Yom Kippur. So I take the very first of everything to declare that everything I get afterwards is to be used for holy purposes. A Chag Sameach, a Gut Moed, and we will be in touch in the future with other Divrei Torah Bekarov, and I look forward to the day when we can all be together again.